And good morning, good evening, everyone. I'm so happy to join you today. I'm happy to be part of this team, this network. And I see too many familiar faces. So pleased to see them as well. I'm going to share and thanks also for the opportunity to work on the Korean data, which was very special and important for me, and learning experience, actually, great learning experience for me working on the unique data set that was produced as part of the project. Let me share, let's see, how can I do that? Um, oh, sorry. And let me do the full screen. Um, what I'm going to share is a co-authored paper research with my colleague İpek İkkaracan, who has also been actively involved with this project from the very beginning. The title of our research is, actually, we tried to explore how much the regulation of labor market working hours matter for Korea in enhancing a gender equal economy, whether it can be an alternative policy to think about how much the shorter labor work hours would impact in the how can I say, the gender distribution within the household of unpaid care work time, etc. So we saw during the last yesterday's session also, Korean economy shows an aging society, and it can be a challenge for the economy, plus falling fertility rates, which we saw from the graphs that Catherine showed us yesterday. And we also know that Korea, like Turkey actually, among the OECD countries, faces the gender employment and wage gaps higher than the others, the other industrial countries as well. And to contextualize the evidence, actually, what we have in our research, we also see that there has been ongoing policy intervention in Korea, which is unlike Turkey, actually. There are some, but we saw much better interventions in Korean case, studying in this research. There have been provisioning of child and elderly care services with subsidies and extended parental care, and recent interventions, actually, with 2018. Um, there was with the new labor standards, minimum wage rise increase, as well as the reduction of statutory maximum limits to weekly employment hours, which were extremely high in Korean case, like 68 hours, and they're planning to have in a new law to decrease it 52 hours, starting with the large companies. But now it start in January 2020, I guess. It is also widened across the economy. So we wanted to kind of simulate, we conduct a simulation analysis, micro simulation analysis, whether and how much the reduction in weekly employment hours will affect in the specific demographic group among men and women who are involved in intensive childcare. So continuing from yesterday's discussions, we observed that the childcare, how can I say, dynamics show a highly dependence on parental care in Korea, like the case in Turkey. But unlike Turkey, there are a lot of alternative external care services, but those are used as complementary to parental care, not as substitutes. So the family-based care system, basically depending on the perception of women's role as the primary caretakers, have been shown by other researchers, and there are a lot of evidence supporting this structure. We also observed long employment hours, as I said, and there have been high gender gaps still, despite all these different alternative external care services are provided. And Korea ranks like third worldwide after Mexico and Costa Rica in terms of annual work hours. So this is kind of different, peculiar to Korea among the OECD countries. Now, What we did specifically in our research, we used the unique data set, CCS, that is the Care Work Family Survey and Childcare, which has been, as I said, conducted under the Care Work and Economy project. And it has two components, but we focused on the childcare component, which provided a rich set of data on the respondents as women's and their spouses' time allocation patterns, and stratified cluster sampling based on the proportion distribution by region and sex have been used. So it represents, in a sense, all the regional distribution of Korea, representing 4.3 million children under 10 years old in Korea. So we also discussed the peculiar and uniqueness of the dataset yesterday. I'm not going to go into details, but using that dataset, we explored the potential reduction, again, to repeat, of full-time market work hours towards narrowing of the gender gaps in paid and unpaid work. And for this, we conducted two policy alternatives, two alternative simulations as phases, first from 68 hours per week to 52 hours, and then further decline to 40 hours per week. So this figure shows, in a sense, how much the external care services are used and at what time of the day they're being used by this specific group of households. As you observe, the use of daycare peaks between 9 a.m. and 2 p.m., which is the yellow part of the graph. We observed, compared to parental care, lower use of private academy and institutional care type of activity services, which peaks between 2 p.m. and 5 p.m., the lower part of the blue of the graph. And from this was one of the evidences that actually enabled us to construct our model to estimate. There seems, we observe the incompatibility actually of working hours with school hours. And even though these type of different external services are used, they're limited in terms of hours and not used by all the households in this specific group. This table shows the main averages actually, and shows how the gap between women and men in terms of paid work and care work differ between weekends, and if you include the weekends or exclude them. Um, Around 15 hours, as we can see, women's weekly paid hours, which is also very high compared to the CATUS, the national representative, not the paid work hours, I'm sorry, which is also very low compared to the national representative paid work hours in CATUS. Weekly work hours is the opposite, actually. When we include the weekends, it's like 8 hours per day, 57 hours. And in total adds up to more than 70 hours per week for women. And when we look at the spouses' time allocation, we see almost the opposite. Paid work hours is like 57 hours, and care work hours is like during the weekends only 6 hours per week, and which doubles when we include the weekends, but still very low, 12 hours per week among men. And the gender gap is quite high, given these numbers. Paid work time is like minus 42. When we, how can I say? When we get the difference between women's and men's averages, and unpaid care work time is the opposite, 45 hours. In total, women work 3 hours longer than men among, again, these specific households. What we did here is like, while exploring the data, we checked, the one on the left, it actually shows, corresponds to averages that I just showed in the previous slide. Spouses' weekly care hours, how that differs with from women's weekly care hours. And the one on the right shows us the survey is very special, giving us asking alternative questions for the paid work hours. So it's not just the stylized usual weekly paid hours, but also they give us the information about when people leave their home for work and then when they come back from work. So we also wanted to see, to include the commuting time for work, how much that differs between the usual and actual work hours. That also helped to get some higher variation actually in the data set, because when you ask people how long do you work for usual working hours, they usually say the legal one or the maximum statutory, the widely used working hours. So this shows the right-hand side distribution of the usual one and the one we calculated as the actual work hours. As you see, it's skewed to the right and shows a quite different distribution actually compared to the usual one. Um, and then as a first step, given this evidence while thinking about the construction of the model, what kind of, again, we did strong assumptions, but all those assumptions needed depends on the actual evidence that is provided by the studies and the empirical data that we were using. So as the first step, we tried to analyze. In our simulation, we were going to ask how much the reduction in the paid work hours of spouses would affect their care work, how much they're going to participate within the household in care work, and then how that will affect women's care work time and paid work time. So first, we want to see whether men's care work time vary in a sense depending on their paid work time. And similar to Turkey, actually, in also owns methodology paper, we read that men actually do not respond in terms of their paid work, care work time to their employment hours. But opposite to that, in a sense, what we did here is we wanted to check whether we see significant differences between the short working hours and longer working hours in terms of ranges, how much that affects um, controlling for demographic factors like age, education, region, etc., etc. So the base group, we estimated separately for dual earner households and single earner households here. Our base group was less than men working, spouses working less than 40 hours per week. And compared to that, men actually really spend, how can I say, when they spend longer hours in the labor market, that affects their care work time. And we got significant results in terms of the change in their care work time compared to paid work time. So depending on this evidence, plus depending on other researchers, literature, during the literature review that women behave as the, or perceived as a second earner within the household, and men are just helpers. What we did is empirically, we set up a recursive model, but also estimated this, all the three equations simultaneously, allowing for correlations and endogeneity between unpaid work time and paid work time, as well as spouses and wives, women's unpaid distribution. So starting from the last equation, actually, the third one, recursive, meaning that paid work time and care work time of men determines, in a sense, plays a role in determining women's paid and care work time, but not vice versa. So we started with the third equation. And there we see S, spouses paid work time, as one of the variables on the right-hand side. And that is treated as exogenous. So we're going to simulate through that variable. And on the left-hand side, as the dependent variable, we see spouses care work time. And then Depending on spouse's care work time in the second equation, we put women's care work time on the left as a dependent variable. And step by step, at the top, we observe how paid work time on women depends on their own care work time. Of course, we control for X, H, Z, all the vectors of individual and household characteristics, and the parameters, theta, etc., all the coefficients that we are looking for, especially for the interested variables that we are interested. The individual and household characteristics, among them, we include the age of youngest child, the number of children younger than 10, spouse's income group, whether the household received outside help on child care or not, and whether that help is part-time or full-time. And as a result of this estimation, we got the relation, the main coefficients that we could use in our simulation. This could be read as if the spouse's paid work time decreases by 10 hours per week, spouse's weekly care hours increases by 2.2 hours. When spouse's weekly care hours increase by 2.2 hours, higher than 1, we got the coefficient for spouse's weekly care hours and women's weekly care hours. So that gives us a higher than, for women's, the increase is higher than the decline in men's care work hours. So we got like 2.4 hours decrease in women's care work, and then that is reflected in women's paid work hours, which is also higher than 1, the coefficient. So it gives us 3.3 hours longer paid work for women if the decline is 10 hours at the beginning. Now, as a result, using those coefficients and all the estimation results and coefficients and the correlations between the equations are in the paper. If requested, I'm happy to share. And we applied 2 alternative simulations. The first one is the maximum amount of work is 52 hours per week. As you can see, let's start from the column 3 and 4. This shows in the baseline, the actual average hours for men is 60 hours almost, 59.9 hours per week, and care work hours is 5.7. And with the simulation, when we limit spouses with 52 hours, we get an average as 52 hours for men, and 7.5 hours care work time for men in the first, as an outcome of the first policy scenario. It's like a 2 hours increase in care work time for them. And in the second simulation, the paid work time is limited to 40 hours per week, and we see a larger impact, like 5 hours, from 5.7 to 9.9 hours care work time for men. How that is reflected on women's paid work time and care work time. And on the left-hand side, you see how much of the sample is affected by the first simulation and the second simulation. So almost half of them are working longer than 40 hours. So the sample size is larger in the second simulation. Women's paid work time and care work time, as you can see, compared to the baseline, increases only 3 hours in the first simulation for first policy scenario. In the second one, it increases like 7 hours per week, 1 hour per day. And as a result, we could calculate the gender gap, and we see a huge decline in the second scenario, actually, from 32.5 to 5.6. I mean, like from 30 to 5.6, the gap, the gender gap in paid work time, but also 10 hours decline in the care work time. So the policy scenarios actually that we got from the simulations, also we wanted to see if the working hours of the spouses decline, whether they will prefer to spend it in the leisure time activities, or they will involve, they'll get involved in care work activities. This was difficult, and we didn't have the full 24-hour distribution of their time. it will be better to understand and explore the substitution in a sense. But what we used, as yesterday in the third presentation, as a measure of well-being, we could check the thanks to the survey variables, the whether the actual and desired time shows us how much this would improve, whether this will be preferred or not, in a sense. So as a well-being indicator, we calculated the difference between the actual and desired care hours. As you can see in the third and fourth column, women's and men's, women's are positive because they're spending much higher than they prefer, 32 hours per week in the actual sample. And then when we get the differences, it declines by 2 hours. But for men, it was interesting also. In the first policy scenario, they are really demanding much higher care work time for themselves. They like to get involved in child care longer than they do actually. So we see the difference between the actual and desired care work time declines for them as well, and it's almost zero in the second policy scenario. So coming to the end, these are the main highlights of the study. Actually, we see a significant impact of reducing working hours. It could be a very interesting policy alternative to think about, especially in the industrialized countries, not maybe in other countries, that we cannot convince people to work less if they're living under poverty, but at least there are many different alternatives to think about how people will agree instead of wage increases. Maybe they bargain for shorter hours of work, etc. There are many thoughts that are now being discussed among the networks, especially in the UK and European countries. And we see new laws are being passed in some of the European countries as well. And as I said, states are committed to transformative policy intervention as well by the international conventions to narrow down the gender gaps. So this, in a sense, showed us a new way to look at, because in Turkey also we've been working to how can I say, to advocate, to do some advocacy among the women's associations to increase, to widen the how can I say, the care services, external care services publicly, but it may not be the end point if people are not willing to use those child care services, or they're not able to use those external, no, I don't mean that. If they're not able, in a sense, given the social values and patriarchal values within the society. So it will be informative, it will be transformative to start with shorter working hours. And yesterday's discussion was very interesting at the end. Beth mentioned about how we see within the surveys that fatherhood dynamics and the patterns, and the surveys on masculinity, surveys on fatherhood show us that men are willing to involve more in childcare within the households, but the policies, the public policies, are lagging behind. So I totally agree, and there is a, I hope these findings would also help contribute to these discussions. So thanks, Ike.
Great.